My dad's name is Tom. He is a man who spent 40 years in construction building things, hauling things, standing under the kind of sun and cold that wears a body down to the bone. He never asked for help. Not once in his life. He would stand in the garage struggling with something for a full hour before he'd even consider asking someone to hold the other end. Then his knees went. Then his heart followed. And this man who had built things with his own hands started quietly disappearing. Not all at once, but in pieces. He stopped climbing stairs. He stopped driving long distances. He stopped filling up a room the way he used to. He never said a word about it. He just got quieter. My name is Megan. I'm an accountant. I work with numbers all day, the small ones. The ones that don't seem to matter until they do, the decimal nobody else caught until it became a problem. My dad is the reason I am the way I am. He told me once, when I was a little girl, that anyone can show up for the big moments if they have to. The hard part is paying attention to the things nobody's going to thank you for. I have a brother named Ethan. He's younger, lives out of state, moved away for work years ago, and never really came back. Holidays and birthday cards and not much. Else, we loved each other. We still do. In the way you love someone whose life has become parallel to yours instead of overlapping with it. He didn't know which of our dad's knees was the bad one that week. I knew both. That's not bitterness. That's just the truth you need before the rest of this makes sense. The moment I knew something had to change wasn't dramatic. It was a Saturday. Morning visit. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, and I watched my dad pick up his coffee cup with both hands. Not because the cup was heavy, because his hands were shaking. And he didn't want me to see it. He saw me notice, looked away. Neither of us said anything. We did this, my dad and I. We communicated in what we didn't say more than what we did. That night, I got home and ordered a different cup. Wider, weighted at the base, easier to hold without it slipping. I brought it over the following week and set it on his kitchen counter without a word. He picked it up with one hand. He looked at me. No, thank you. No speech. He just held it for a second and nodded slightly. We had always worked like that. My mom, Linda, is the part of this story that people almost miss. She had been taking care of my dad for years, quietly, without a single complaint, without anyone asking if she needed anything. The medications, the appointments, the cooking, the driving. She carried all of it, and nobody, including me, if I'm being completely honest, ever really stopped to ask how she was doing. One afternoon, I came over and found her standing in the kitchen, hands flat on the counter, eyes closed. She wasn't crying. She was just holding herself up, the way you do when you've been running on empty and the counter is the only thing keeping you vertical. When she heard me come in, she straightened up and said she was just resting her back. I knew she wasn't. That was the day I started thinking about the house. I had been saving money for years without knowing what I was saving for. After that afternoon in my mom's kitchen, I understood exactly what it was for. I worked overtime for almost 2 years. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. There were nights I sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets open at midnight, eyes burning, just wanting to sleep. But every dollar felt like a doorway my dad might be able to walk through on his own someday. And that kept me going. I found a piece of land in northern Michigan, small lake, quiet town. It's the kind of place where, at night, all you can hear is water. I hired a contractor and told him exactly what I needed. The doorways had to be wider than standard, wide enough for a wheelchair, if it ever came to that. I said the word wheelchair out loud, and my voice caught on it just for a second. Maybe because saying it made it real. The contractor didn't react. He just wrote it down and let me keep going. No steps anywhere. Not at the entrance, not between rooms. A bench in the shower, grab bars, soft flooring. Kitchen counters at a height my mom could actually work at without hunching. and a path from the back of the house to the dock, smooth, flat, gradual, because I needed my dad to be able to walk on his own with nobody holding his elbow. That was the piece that mattered most to me. My dad grew up on the water. His father was a fisherman. Tom spent his whole early life on docks. And somewhere along the way, every dock we knew had stairs or steep paths or rocky shores. And he'd stopped being able to get to them. I had this memory I kept coming back to. I was a little girl. My dad had taken me out in a boat and handed me a fishing rod for the very first time. I was terrified I would do it wrong, and he didn't reach over and take it from me. He just sat next to me and said, "You can do this. See, you're doing it?" Right now, every single decision I made about that house came from that one sentence. I wanted my dad to feel the way I felt that day. Like the person next to him still believed he could do things. The contractor finished in early spring. I hadn't told my parents anything. I drove them up to the lake on a Saturday, told them we were going for lunch. We pulled into the driveway. My dad looked at the house and then looked at me. He didn't say a word. He got out of the car, walked to the front door, and pushed it open. He walked through the wide doorways. He saw the flat floors and the lower counters and the bathroom with the grab bars. He turned around in the middle of the living room and looked at me. His eyes were wet. He still didn't say anything. He walked out the back door, across the porch, down the path to the dock, slow, steady on his own. He reached the end and stood there, face to the water for a long time. I stayed back on the porch. This was his moment. My mom came out and put her hand on my arm. She said, "You built this for him?" I said, "I built it for both of you." When he came back up the path, he reached for my hand and squeezed it. He couldn't get the words out. He didn't need to. They moved in 2 weeks later. The next 6 months were the best I'd seen my parents look in years. My dad walked to the dock most mornings. Some days he made it all the way to the end. Some days, only halfway. But he was walking. He was a man with somewhere to go in the morning, and he was the one deciding to go. My mom started smiling again. The real kind, not the kind that takes effort. She planted a small herb garden by the kitchen window. She and my dad sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the light change on the water. One afternoon, my dad wired the porch light himself. Slowly, over the course of an afternoon. It was the first thing he'd built in years. 6 months. It was how long the quiet lasted. I was in town one Saturday when my dad called me. His voice was strange. He said, "Megan, your brother is here." I said, "What do you mean here?" He said, "At the house." I drove out to the lake. There was a rental car next to my dad's truck. I walked onto the porch and through the open door and heard Ethan's voice, easy, warm. The tone he uses when he wants something but hasn't gotten to the asking part yet. He looked up and said, "Hey sis, I came home." I looked at him. I looked at my dad in the chair behind him. I looked at the wide doorways and the flat floors and the cup on the counter. I knew he hadn't come for no reason. I just didn't know what the reason was yet. It started the next evening on the porch. My dad was watching the water. Ethan was beside him with a glass of iced tea. He said almost to himself casually, "Dad, do you really walk down to the dock by yourself in the mornings?" My dad said yes. Ethan said, "Is that safe?" He said it the way an adult talks to a child about crossing a busy street. My dad didn't answer. He just looked at the water. The next morning, he didn't walk to the dock. He sat on the porch with his coffee and stared at the water from a distance, like it was somewhere other people went now. The day after that, the same thing. I watched my dad quietly surrender the one thing he had taken back. He did it because his son had asked one soft question on an ordinary evening. A few days later, Ethan offered to walk with him. He said it warmly. He meant to be helpful. He really did. My dad didn't know how to say no. Ethan held his elbow the whole way down the path. By the time they reached the end of the dock, my dad wasn't walking anymore. T was being escorted. He sat down on the bench, and his face had changed. It was the face of a man standing on a dock that no longer belongs to him. He didn't walk down there alone again. Not while Ethan was in the house. I started watching more carefully. I am an accountant. I see patterns. And the pattern I was watching was this. Is that safe? Is that responsible? Do you feel like you have a say? Hey, they were not random questions. They were a sequence. Then came the folder at dinner. Assisted living places near Ethan. Printed pages, cost breakdowns, set between the breadbasket and the salt like it was a normal thing to bring to the table. My dad picked it up, looked at it for 2 seconds, walked to the drawer where my mom kept the takeout menus, put it inside, and closed the drawer. His hand was shaking as he sat back down. I was the only one watching his hands. I'd been watching his hands my whole life. Nobody said anything for the rest of the meal. That night, my dad came out to the porch where I was sitting. He had a folded piece of paper. He held it out without a word. I unfolded it. It was a power of attorney form. The agent line had Ethan's name. The principal line had my dad's. The signature line was blank. I asked quietly where he got it. He said Ethan had handed it to him that afternoon when nobody else was in the room. He told him it was just a precaution, something to have in place. He said Ethan had a pen in his other hand before my dad had finished reading it, he said. Ethan was watching my face the way you look at someone to see if they're tired enough or confused enough to do what you want. He had walked out of the room and carried the paper in his pocket for hours. Not knowing what to do with it, I sat there with that paper and every piece of the last 2 weeks rearranged itself in my head. The doc question, the assisted living folder, his email with the red final notice subject line I'd caught a glimpse of by accident. This, it wasn't concern. It was a strategy. I told him he had done the right thing. He looked at me with eyes that were tired in a way I'd never seen. Before, he said, "Megan, my own son tried to get me to sign something while watching my face like I was already gone." The next morning, a man I had never seen came into the backyard with a clipboard and a camera. I heard my dad from the porch. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The man said he was there for the appraisal. My dad said, "What appraisal?" I came outside. My dad turned and looked at me the way a man looks when something is happening inside his own home, and he is the last person to know about it. I asked the appraiser who had hired him, Ethan, 2 days earlier. Without asking a single one of us, I told him to leave. He packed up and walked back to his car. I went inside. Ethan was in the kitchen. I asked him why there was a man photographing my father's house. He said we needed to know what the property was worth. He said it was responsible. I said, "You don't call an appraiser unless you're thinking about selling." He said nobody was talking about selling. Then he said the place was too big, the dock was dangerous, it would be more responsible to find them something smaller, closer to family. Closer to him? I said. This is the only place my dad can walk through doorways without help. It's the only place he can shower without being afraid. It's the only place he can walk to water under his own power. You don't know any of that because you weren't here when I was building it. Something shifted in his face. The warm, helpful brother disappeared and the real one came out. He said, "You know what this actually is? You spent 2 years making yourself the only person who matters in this family. You built a house and now you decide who walks where in it." He said, "I'm their son too. My name isn't on the deed. It isn't on the bank accounts. It isn't on anything." Said, "Your name isn't on anything because you weren't here. When I was crying in a contractor's office over the word wheelchair, you weren't on the phone with me. When Mom was holding herself up against the kitchen counter with nothing left, you were in another state. You don't get to spend 10 years away and walk in for 3 weeks and demand a name on anything." His voice cracked. He said, "I needed help." I did not soften. I said, "I'm sorry you needed help, but you didn't come home to ask. You came home too." I pulled the power of attorney from my pocket and held it up. I said, This is what taking looks like. My dad came in from the porch. He had been listening. He looked at Ethan, then at me, then at Ethan again. He said, I may be sick, but I am not deaf. He said, I am tired of people standing in my own house discussing my life like I am not in the room. He said it quietly.
My dad has never raised his voice once in his entire life.
But that sentence had more weight than anything I'd ever heard him say. Ethan set his glass down hard enough that water spilled across the counter. He picked up his suitcase. He walked to the front door and stopped. He turned around and looked at me. This isn't over, he said. He walked out. The door closed behind him. My mom was in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. The porch light was on, but the damage stayed after he left. My dad didn't walk to the dock the day Ethan drove away. He didn't walk the next day either. He sat on the porch with his coffee in the wide cup and looked at the water from a distance. Like it was somewhere that belonged to someone else now. I came over every morning that week. I made breakfast. I sat with my mom. I watched my dad not go to the dock, and I did not push him, because the whole point of this house had been that he got to decide for himself. If I started telling him to walk, I would prove Ethan right. On the fourth morning, he asked me the question he'd been building up to. He said, Megan, am I a project to you? You taking care of me, or are you managing me? He said it gently. The way you ask something you're afraid to hear the answer to. I sat down across from him. I took a breath. I said, Dad, I built you a house with wide doorways because I wanted you to walk through them on your own. I built you a path to the dock because I wanted you to walk to the water on your own. If I were trying to manage you, I would have put railings everywhere. I would have put a chair on the dock. I would have hired a nurse. I did none of those things because I wasn't trying to take care of you. I was trying to make a place where you could still take care of yourself. It looked at me for a long time. Something in his face came back. He sat with his coffee a while longer. Then he set the cup down. He stood up slowly. He went to the bedroom and came back wearing his shoes. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't have to. I followed him to the porch and stopped at the door. He kept going, crossed the porch, down. The path toward the water slow, careful. On his own, I stood at the door and did not move. This was not my walk to take. He made it to the end of the dock, sat down on the bench. His hands were shaking a little, but one of them was holding the wide cup. He took a sip. He turned his face toward the sun. I watched him from the porch. My eyes filled up, but I didn't cry. Not yet. This moment was his. My mom came up beside me and put her hand on my arm. After a while, she said, Your dad went to the dock today. I said, I know, she said, because of you. I said, No, Mom. He went because of him, just made the door wide enough. Ethan called about 3 weeks later. I almost didn't pick up. He didn't say much at first. Then he said, How's Dad? I said he was walking to the dock again. He was quiet. Then he said, Good. Just that one word, but there was something underneath it that hadn't been there when he left. Not an apology exactly, but leaning in that direction. He said, I shouldn't have called the appraiser. I said, No, you shouldn't have. He said, I told myself I was being responsible. I said, I know what you told yourself. Before he hung up, he said, Tell Dad hi. I said, Okay. I didn't promise when. That night, I sat in my own house alone for the first time in weeks, and I think my body finally let go of everything it had been carrying. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about my dad at the end of the dock with the sun on his face. I thought about my mom finally smiling. Again, I thought about his question, Are you managing me? And I cried for about 10 minutes. Not loudly. The kind of crying that happens when you have been holding something for too long and you finally get to put it down when it stopped. I washed my face and went to bed. A few days later, my dad handed me a note. No explanation. Just held it out. His handwriting had gotten harder to read. The letters wobbled in places. Had to look at it twice. It said, "You did not control me. You saw me." I read it 3 times, folded it. I put it in my wallet. It is still there. About a month later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A local attorney, older man, said he'd grown up with my dad. Said my dad had come into his office a few weeks earlier, without telling anyone, and asked him to draw up a new will. He was calling because the paperwork was ready and he wanted to confirm my dad was on his way in. I sat down on my couch. My dad had quietly handled the whole thing himself.
The
Way he used to fix the roof of our old house when nobody was looking, finishing the job before anyone could offer to take over. I drove out to the lake that afternoon. I made coffee. We sat on the porch. After a while, he looked at me and said, "The attorney called you, didn't he?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good." He said, "The house goes to you." He said it the way a man says something he has thought about for a very long time and is completely at peace with. I started to say he didn't have to do that. He lifted one hand, just a small rise of the fingers. Not a gesture of dismissal, just, "Let me finish," he said. "I am not doing this out of anger. I am not doing it to punish anyone. I am doing it because, for a long time, other people have been making choices about my life. And I am the one who lives it. I made this choice myself. It is the first one in a while that nobody else helped me make." I couldn't speak for a moment. He reached over and put his hand on top of mine. He said, "You built me a house, Megan. You didn't build it for a deed. You built it because you saw me. And I'm writing that down on paper because I know who actually saw me." I cried then. Quietly, for about a minute, he didn't try to fix it. He just kept his hand on mine. That same evening, my mom and I stood on the porch watching my dad at the dock. She said, "Your brother got everything when he was little, because he made noise. You never made noise, so we stopped looking." She said, "I've been thinking about every birthday and every dinner, and every car ride where I didn't really see you, because you seemed fine. You were not fine. You were quiet. There's a difference." And I should have known it. I told her she didn't have to say all of that. She said, "Yes, I do." We stood there watching my dad at the end of the dock. Neither of us said another word. I came over one evening with groceries, the cheese my mom likes, the bread my dad likes, a thermos of fresh coffee. We sat on the porch as the sun went down behind the trees. The water was still. A heron landed at the edge of the dock and stood there on its long legs. My dad pointed at it. He said one word, "Look." We all watched it together. Nobody spoke. It's the kind of quiet that does not need filling. I built my dad a house. But what I actually gave him wasn't walls and a roof. I gave him back the feeling of being a man who still had a say in his own life. And every morning he walks to that dock slow, little shaky, but on his own 2 feet. I get to watch the man who taught me everything become himself again.